Hello, everyone. I'm Will Blake, and I'm here with Maddie O'Donnell, and today we're going to be discussing the evolution of small ball in the NBA. Now, Maddie, just off the top, what is small ball?
Small ball is the transition in the NBA from the old age back to the basket to nowadays space and pace.
All right, so, what do you think this evolution of small ball means for the NBA?
The evolution of small ball is great for the NBA. Small ball leads for more offense, and as you know, people, they come to the games, they want to see more offense than defense. They want to be wowed by crazy dunks. Nowadays, everyone wants to see people shoot as many threes as they possibly can. That's what excites the fans nowadays. So it's generating more revenue for the NBA small ball.
So you think that it's good for the business of the NBA?
It's great for the business of the NBA. The more money the NBA can make, considering they're a business, the more success the NBA is going to have in the future going forward.
So you think the NBA would definitely encourage this kind of transition towards small ball?
Yes, the NBA has embraced it. Although small ball only started roughly 6 or 7 years ago in the 2011-2012 NBA Finals, when head coach of the Miami Heat, Eric Spoelstra, he substituted small forward LeBron James in at power forward and the typically playing power forward Chris Bosh in at center. That's when small ball began, and ever since that 2011-2012 NBA Finals, it's just blown up since then.
So do you think that small ball kind of evolved because of a specific person or group of people? Do you think it just kind of came on its own?
I feel like the game was going towards that. However, small ball came so directly, as I said, in the 2011-2012 NBA Finals. Back in NBA history, in the previous decades, it was dominated by big men, players who were able to just play back to the basket. If you think of it, in the 1960s, you had Bill Russell and the Celtics just dominate. He was a big, tall, strong player, and he was able to use his size to dominate. He won 13 championships, most in NBA history by a single player. Then in the 70s, you had another strong big man in Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He played on both the Lakers and the Bucks, and once again, he was able to dominate as a result of his strength and size. If you look in the 80s and 90s, you have strong, athletic big men like Wilt Chamberlain in the late 70s to early 80s. And then 80s, 90s, it was dominated by Shaquille O'Neal. All these players were just so dominant, and even though they lacked speed, they lacked the ability to shoot the ball, as a result of their size, no one could stop them, and that's how they won games. They were able to use their size on the offensive end and just bully you in the paint, and they were also able to use their size on the defensive end by contesting your shots, rebounding everything over you. So it's just an evolution to nowadays. You don't see a dominant player like that.
So obviously, as you mentioned, the NBA kind of grew on the backs of all these big, gigantic big men, like centers. So obviously we went over the transition and kind of how it started. Why do you think so many teams were so quick to adapt this kind of play style, and why do you think it evolved into this so quickly?
Yeah, that's a very good question. As I said, in the 2011-2012 NBA Finals, that's when it started, and it's picked up since then. Every team that's won the championship since that year in which the Miami Heat won, every team has won with a small ball lineup. You have the Heat, like I said. You have the Oklahoma City Thunder. They have a 6'10", originally playing small forward, and Kevin Durant. They substituted him to the power forward. They were able to make the finals as a result of that switch. And then arguably the best small ball team in NBA history, which we're watching right now before our eyes, the Golden State Warriors. They're the excellence of small ball right now in the NBA. They have a point guard in Stephen Curry that can shoot from anywhere on the court. They have a shooting guard in Klay Thompson. That's your ideal two guard. He can play defense. He can lock up the best players in the NBA. However, he also has the shooting ability and athleticism to get to the rim and drive. Small forward, you have Kevin Durant. As I've previously mentioned him before, he's just a born-bred scorer. Give him the ball, he can go to work for you. And then power forward center, I think, is the best small ball player the NBA has ever seen in history, is Draymond Green. He's only 6'7", however, he's 255 pounds. And as a result of his small stature, yet he's very weighty, he's able to do everything on the court. And even though his numbers aren't the most flashy, he's never puts up MVP numbers. He consistently does everything on the court, which is necessary for the Warriors to win. He rebounds. He plays defense. He's able to score. He's able to rebound, and he's the heart and soul of their team. And not only that, he's a vocal leader.
So by implementing this small ball lineup and more spacing the floor, it allows for more success with the players that Golden State has.
Yes, it allows them to get more open for threes. And considering their roster is built upon three-point shooting, they're just dominating the modern-day NBA.
Okay, so you've talked about kind of the transfer of more small forwards and power forwards moving to center. What do you think this is saying about the more traditional role of the big man center in the NBA?
It's saying that it's just not as needed anymore in the NBA. Sure, you still have some dominant bigs. Look at Joel Embiid in Philadelphia. You can look at Rudy Gobert in Utah. They're dominant. However, they lack essential skills, which had they had, for example, a nice three-point shot, more athleticism, they'd be so much better.
What do you see as the potential future role of the big man in the NBA?
I think we're looking at it right now in Nikola Jokic on the Denver Nuggets. He's the starting center on the Denver Nuggets. He's 6'10". He's able, like Draymond Green, he's able to do everything. Despite the fact that he's a center, he always piles up assists, which back in the past NBA, it wouldn't have happened. He's consistently with the point guards in top assists, and it's incredible. He has the athleticism to get up and down the court. He's able to hit a three, and he's able to play defense on the other end. I think that's the future of the NBA right there. Every center, power forward is going to have to be that kind of guy that can just do what Nikola Jokic does night in, night out.
So every player on the court should be able to space the ball and shoot.
Yes, back in the NBA in the past decades, not everyone needed to shoot. Nowadays, everyone needs to shoot. If you're on a basketball court and you can't shoot, you're a liability. We see that in Philadelphia. Ben Simmons, he's great talent. He's the future of the league. However, as a result of lacking a jump shot, no one respects him out there, and it leads to better defense by the opposing teams because they can leave him wide open.
Do you think that the evolution of small ball and floor spacing, does that create not just like more exciting games as in terms of three-point shooting, but do you think it just creates more athletic and exciting games overall?
Yes, throughout NBA history, there have been a lot of good dunkers in game. However, as a result of this modern NBA where it's all about space and pace, in game, so many more athletic dunks are allowed to be put on, and that leads to better ratings, more views, which leads to more money for the NBA.
So this kind of pressure on the perimeter now that's being enforced put more space in the paint, which could allow for more exciting dunks.
Exactly. And also, like you said, there's more spacing on the perimeter. So if you have an athletic player on your team, you can look at Donovan Mitchell as a prime example of this. You can look at Jason Tatum on the Boston Celtics. As a result of originally being on the outside, they're able to use their athleticism now to get to the paint and just finish there.
So just also in terms of play style changing, what do you think is the potential evolution? What do you see in the evolution of offensive and defensive game planning as a result of this evolution in small ball?
In terms of offense, it's just about chucking up as many shots as possible. Because in the modern day NBA, everyone is so good at shooting. So the more shots you can get up, you're going to be bound to win more games if you're able to put up a lot of shots. That's what the Golden State Warriors have done the past 3 years when they've won 2 championships. They're able to just consistently get up a lot more shots than their opponents. And in terms of defense, it's just contesting the shots, doing the best you can.
So with the new game plans that are kind of being implemented with a lot more emphasis on this three-point floor spacing and defense that's more concerned about perimeter shots than they used to be, do you see any players that aren't successful in the current NBA but that you think would be successful in the old traditional NBA that's more big man back to basket?
Yes. You can look at the 2015 NBA draft, the number 3 overall pick, Jahlil Okafor. He went to Duke. He's a 6'11", 265 big man. He was picked with the 3rd overall pick. However, as a result of his back to the basket game, his game never panned out in the NBA. And it's amazing to think about. He was a number 3 overall pick just a couple years ago. And now, as a result of his game, which just doesn't fit in the modern day NBA, he's not even on a roster anymore. You can also look at a guy like Carmelo Anthony. When he was in his prime in like 2008, 2009, he was dominant. He was one of the best scorers in the league. However, he used iso ball. Every play went through him. He was able to use his dribble moves to get to the basket. In today's NBA, that doesn't work. You need to have good ball movement, as seen by the Golden State Warriors, Boston Celtics. Because Carmelo doesn't fit that role anymore, Carmelo's basically, his career has fallen off, and every sportscaster notices it.
Do you think we're seeing potentially something similar with someone like LeBron James, just because he does rack up a lot of assists and stuff, and he does share the ball well, and he's a great passer, but the offense seems to run through just one player on whatever team he's on, and that's him. Do you think that potentially kind of mindset and play style doesn't fit anymore in the current NBA?
That's a very interesting point. Although LeBron tends to dominate the ball on the offensive side of the floor, considering his results in his career, you can't deny that. If it's not broke, why fix it? Some players are just born to do something. He's born to have the ball in his hand and facilitate his team's offense. And it's got him so many championships. And he's arguably the best basketball player in NBA history. So if it's not broke, why fix it in that case?
So you think that since the NBA is such like an individual-driven league in so many cases, if someone's that good, you don't necessarily need all the court spacing?
You need the court spacing. However, sometimes in LeBron James's case, it's okay when the ball distribution just comes from the one player.
That's interesting. How about the other way around? Do you see any players that you think are successful now that you think maybe wouldn't be quite as successful back when we had such a dominant big man role?
Yeah, the players I've mentioned that are so good in today's NBA, like Nikola Jokic. Sure, he's great today, as I previously mentioned. However, way back when, if you were to put him up against a dominant big man like Shaquille O'Neal or even Hakeem, they just back him down to the basket, and it would be an easy layup for them every time, and he wouldn't be able to contest that. And on the other end of the ball, when he'd try to back them down, he'd have no success because he's too skinny. It's kind of amazing to think about. In the NBA years ago, at least every team had a player over 300 pounds. In today's NBA, the heaviest NBA player, Robin Lopez, he only weighs 287 pounds, and he barely sees the floor. In order to be successful in today's NBA, you have to sacrifice weight.
So it's much more about finesse, even for the big guys who are scoring in the post.
Exactly.
So obviously you mentioned that the NBA would support it, and it seems like it would definitely create more high-scoring and exciting games.
Mm-hmm.
And
as a result of the high scoring, though, I do think that there's going to become a point where the NBA can no longer sustain this because scoring records now are being broken on a nightly basis. Just last night, Klay Thompson on the Golden State Warriors, he hit 14 three-pointers, setting an NBA record. He got 52 points in 27 minutes. That scoring, the NBA record books, they're not going to be able to remain the way they are. And sure, that might be a good thing in the eyes of some people. The NBA doesn't want that. They like to remember their history and keep it the way it is. So I think eventually small ball is going to have to go away. And it's going to need to be more defensive oriented eventually. Right now, the NBA is in a golden age. It's just recently become the most popular sport in America, surpassing football. That could be partially due to the Kaepernick scandal. However, we're not getting into that right now. But the NBA, once again, it's the most popular sport in America right now. It's not broken, don't fix it. But there's going to come a point where it needs fixing because the offense is just going to be too dominant and the defense is going to be not even there.
You said that they might need to get rid of small ball. Do you think they're going to get rid of it, or are they just going to maybe change things to help the defenses against this new kind of era?
Exactly. I think defensive head coaches, they're going to be more prized as time goes on in the NBA. Because if you can stop the small ball hold the opposing team to not as many points. That's how you're going to win games going forward.
So, do you think small ball has such a great success now just because maybe defenses haven't had a sufficient time to prepare for this new kind of play style?
They've had roughly 6 to 7 years. I don't feel that the defense hasn't had enough time. And I know the old saying was defense wins championships. I think that's changed now. I think offense wins championships. The best defense is the good offense.
So this is a little off topic, but what kind of effect do you think small ball could have potentially on season long, like sustaining good health without fatigue?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. They were just talking about that at the Lakers game the other night. LeBron, a member of the Lakers, he's 33 years old. This is his 16th season. Most players aren't as dominant as he is in his 16th year. The Lakers, they're small ball. They emphasize pace. They like to get up and down the court as fast as possible. A guy like LeBron, who's played 16 years in the NBA, this is year 16, he's not going to be able to run up and down, up and down, up and down the court every night. He's going to fatigue. So the Lakers are going to have to find a way to make it that he's not going to fatigue as easily.
So since it's a lot more high paced, you have to look out for physical wear and tear much more on players.
Exactly. I feel the way in which the NBA has shifted to this small ball and this game of speed, basically, the younger players are much more favored because they don't have as many miles under them as the older players do. So they're allowed to exploit that and just dominate.
So you think that maybe the lifespan for an NBA player, you think it might shorten a little bit under this new system because of how much it expects from its players?
Yeah, it's kind of like an NFL running back in a way. NFL running backs, it's believed that they typically lose their touch, so to speak, when they reach roughly 30. That's what's kind of happening in the NBA. Previously, players took a lot of years to get adjusted to the game of the NBA. However, nowadays, they're adapting readily and very quick to the game. And so they're having their best years earlier in their career. So that leads to them almost burning out once they reach their lower 30s.
Do you think that could be beneficial for the NBA, though, with players being able to come in and kind of maybe captivate this struggling city that doesn't have a great basketball team? Like we've seen that with people like Donovan Mitchell. Do you think that that's
Exactly.
a possibility?
I think it's good for the market of the NBA, but it's not good for the individual player because you have to forget the NBA is a business. Sure, the NBA is a business, but the player is also his own business. He has to worry about himself. And in the modern day NBA, he's not going to be able to play till he's roughly 38, 39 like they used to be able to. So that's going to, as a result, he's going to miss out on a lot of money. His health is going to be in jeopardy.
Do you think that big men like centers, do you think that they could potentially see less wear and tear with since their job seems to be getting a bit less physical, or do you think that since it's still so high paced, they're struggling more?
I think that it's as a result of it being so high paced, what centers have to do now is called rim chasing, meaning the offensive play is finished. They don't do anything else, but just they focus on running down to the court, getting to the other rim. Same thing on defense. They got to stop. Their only focus is to just run down and get to the other rim on offense. As a result of that rim chasing, that's going to lead to fatigue. So I don't think that the centers are more helped in the modern day NBA.
And since there's such a high emphasis on rim chasing with big men, do you think that's why so many teams are putting agile small forwards in that position?
Exactly. That's how small ball began.
Do you think that something like small ball could potentially increase the parity in the league so that maybe more small market teams, they don't need a huge marquee free agent who can do anything? If they can establish a good system, they'll be okay. Do you think that might help the parity of the NBA as a whole?
Yes. Regardless of small ball in this case, I think as a result of social media and how popular social media has become in the past decade, you no longer have to worry now about small market teams not having the assets to lure in a big free agent, because as a result of like Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, highlights, NBA highlights are everywhere. So it's not like you have to worry about people missing your highlight. So I don't think small markets are equally as impacted now as they used to be, which is a good thing for the NBA. It creates a more level playing field.
So, kind of expand more on this level playing field that you're talking about.
Yeah, small ball, as I had previously said, although the social media leads for a more level playing field, the rise of small ball inadvertently came with the rise of like big threes and big fours, which I'll explain what they are later. And the rise of big three and big fours, even big fives in the case of the Golden State Warriors. Now there's almost less competition in the NBA. It's not equally balanced. You just have teams that are dominating the rest of the competition because they're putting together 3, 4, and even 5 of the best players in the NBA on one team. It's kind of crazy. This summer, the Warriors signed marquee big man DeMarcus Cousins. Prior to signing Cousins, the Warriors had won 2 championships, and now they had like several infographics showing that the Warriors starting 5 is better than the Eastern Conference All-Star starting 5. And I don't think competition, the lack of competition in the NBA like that is good for the NBA.
But don't you think that the potential teaming up of all-stars to create these teams, do you think fans would like that?
Fans of that team, of course, like that. However, opposing fans do not like that. If you have, for example, Golden State Warriors, great team, as I previously mentioned, versus the Orlando Magic, they don't even have a single all-star on their team. 5 all-stars compared to all young players who don't have that much potential. Would you want to go see that game if you're a fan of the team that doesn't have the potential or the all-stars?
That's a good point. So do you think that the rise of this kind of small ball new era, do you think it kind of encouraged this joining together of all-stars?
Yes, it all leads back to the Miami Heat. They were able to sign free agents LeBron James and Chris Bosh to form the first big 3 of the modern NBA, and teams couldn't beat them, so they had to get better to beat the Heat. And then this leads to teams just piling on as many best players as they possibly can, and it's almost become a game within a game to get the most all-stars on your team.
And do you think that part of this reason is because the players want to team up so they can play in this more exciting league together?
Of course, when you can see like a good friend of yours throw down a good dunk or hit a deep 3, you're going to want to do that. So that's good for the individual. However, it's not good for the league in whole.
So you think overall the small ball could be good for the NBA and its ratings are increasing, but what's resulted from it, which is kind of this era of super teams, you don't think is good for the NBA?
Yes, exactly. Super teams, just like the pacing and spacing, one day there's going to become a point where the NBA just can't have all these super teams anymore. The wealth, so to speak, needs to be more equally divided.
All right, I think that's it.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Will.
No problem. Thank you for talking with me.
Of course. Hi, I'm Matty O'Donnell, and I'm here with Will Blake. And today we're discussing whether or not college athletes should be paid. Will, what is this long-standing debate about whether college athletes should be paid?
So basically, the NCAA and its sports programs generate a lot of revenue, and a controversy has begun to arise in the past few years, probably around since the 2000s, maybe a little earlier, about whether or not these college athletes should be paid for the work that they do for their colleges. And the arguments for both sides, there are people who say college athletes should be paid because of how much work they do for their colleges, how much money they bring in because of the sports that they play and the work that they do for their colleges, and therefore they should be paid based off of that. And then there are other people who say that they should not be paid because they're already getting a free education to a college, and this is just extra stuff that they have decided to do, and that they are, assuming that they're on scholarship, they're basically getting a free education and they don't really need this extra money.
Interesting. What is your take on this subject matter? Do you think college athletes should be paid considering they pour their blood, sweat, and tears into their athletics for their respective schools?
Personally, I believe that college athletes should be paid just because of how much revenue they bring in for the colleges that they play for, especially considering back in the day when the NCAA was first formed in the early 1900s, it was formed in order to implement safety measures. It wasn't formed specifically to make money. It was formed to implement safety measures in college football. And then when the athletic scholarship itself was introduced in the 1950s, the revenue that college athletics programs were bringing in, it was purely off of how many tickets they sold to home games. So the money that they were bringing in was directly based off of the players that they were able to bring in, and it wasn't that much because it was only how much they were selling at their home games. But today, with how much money colleges are bringing in, not just from home games, but from the NCAA themselves because of how much ad revenue it's coming in, and from playing in big games like March Madness, teams get so much money just from playing in a single game. The fact that players are bringing in so much more money and they're working so much harder in order to do that, I definitely believe that they should be paid.
Yeah, I agree with your take on this. However, how much do you think of this revenue the players should be given? Because at the end of the day, the NCAA is a business and they have to generate revenue to keep their business going. So where do the players fall in line with this?
I don't think the players have to be paid like a normal 9-to-5 job, because a lot of the times these players spend their off time where they could be working and generating revenue. They spend that working for the program, but I don't think they necessarily need to be paid as much as like office workers do. But just because there's so many players, it would be difficult to distribute this wealth accurately. But if they could give college athletes enough wealth where they could get by and not have to worry about eating just because they're doing this extra thing for college and generating so much revenue for them, they shouldn't have to worry about like whether or not they're going to be able to eat what they're going to eat just because they're doing this.
Yeah, I know a big thing about whether college athletes should be paid or not is this whole notion of one and done, meaning they only play in college for 1 year and then automatically leave their college, go to the league. Do you think this is acceptable?
I don't necessarily think the colleges or the players are completely in the right.
So you think both of them are in the wrong?
Yeah, but I feel like the players are more forced into doing this because right now what we're seeing is that college sports are kind of the be-all, end-all for recruitment for the pro leagues. And if players want to go to specifically college basketball, if they want to go to the NBA, what they need to do is go to college. And since colleges are implementing this rule, they don't want to stay for more than they have to if their end goal is just to go to the NBA. And college is just a stepping stone. But I feel like the main issue there is the fact that there is no real other option for these players than to go to college and play a year.
Yeah, it's almost a corrupt system. I agree with you, where the college, they're able to generate all this revenue off the players. However, the players, they're there not even by their own will. They just have to be there. Something should be done about it. What do you think is a potential solution to this?
I feel like what the NBA has begun to do so far is a good start. And especially, I feel like it's a lot better in the NBA than the NFL because if you want to go to the NBA, you only have to go to college for a year. And there are a lot of different potential options that are growing, such as the JBA, which is still not very good yet for recruiting, but it's coming along. It's a new alternative. And in the NBA, it's not just recruiting from colleges, it's recruiting from places overseas. And you see that a lot in the NHL as well. Just these pro leagues of the NBA and the NHL can recruit. It's not just from colleges, it's from also overseas leagues. But I feel like the NFL is a lot further behind these because you have to go to college for at least 3 years and play there, and then that's your only option if you want to go to the league. There's not some other place you can go to develop your skills if you don't want to go to college and end up living there with very little wage that you have, or potentially, if you're not on scholarship, paying $50,000 a year to go play football with the hopes of playing in the NFL.
Yeah. You mentioned LeVar Ball's JBA, or Junior Basketball Association. Do you want to tell me more about that and what it actually is?
So the JBA was established by LeVar Ball, and it was an alternative route for top amateur players to play professionally without having to compete at the college level and not gain any money. So he offered a wage per month. It wasn't huge, but it was about, I believe it's $3,000 per month and 60% of their jersey sales. So I definitely feel like that's a good start, and it's kind of, these kind of things are good because they're kind of threatening the NCAA in a way, because they're not just going to allow the NCAA to sit there and rake in billions of dollars per year and not pay their players if alternate routes like the JBA could potentially come in and take some of their business. So I feel like it's a good step in potentially helping these college athletes get paid.
Yes, you mentioned that the NBA has made several good attempts to basically regulate the corruption within NCAA athletics. Has the NFL made any reforms?
Not that I know of, and I feel like they wouldn't want to anyway, just because of the fact that these colleges you get a very defined set of players. And usually you have the big 5 conferences known as the Power 5 conferences in college football, and you have the best players from there, and that's your only source of really where you can draft players. And I feel like the NFL is fine with that because there's not any outside competing sources like the NBA has, like players from like Europe and Asia, but the NFL doesn't have like competing places where they can scout players and draft players from. And I feel like they're fine with that because it just makes it a lot more simpler for them, and I feel like they wouldn't want to change it.
Yeah. I know in the NBA, if you don't want to go to college, you can go play a year overseas. Are you allowed to do a similar thing in the NFL, like play a year of Canadian football, for example, and then be drafted in the next NFL draft?
I'm sure players have done that where they go play Canadian football, but it's very rare that you see players drafted from the Canadian Football League to the National Football League. There's only one player in the history of the NFL that I can really remember doing that, and that's Warren Moon. And that was a long time ago, and he should have been probably a first-round pick, and he would have been, but back then people didn't want to draft him because he was black. But I feel like the NFL just has a tough time establishing these new alternative scouting systems when the one that they have right now is working so well.
But don't you think it would be beneficial for a NFL prospect to go somewhere and play and have like a rigorous, basically football schedule? Like training is from this time to this time, practice is from this time to this time. You have to follow a strict diet. Wouldn't that help them in the NBA, or is college more important and having a college education?
I think that having a college education could be beneficial if the person who's going there does not have like definite plans of like, okay, I'm going to the NBA or the NFL or bust. And I think that when players go to colleges on scholarships, they aren't necessarily planning on staying there and getting their education. I'm sure a lot of them are, but even if you are and you're on a scholarship, you don't have any other way to bring in money because you're spending all of your free time where you could be working and bringing in money working on your sport and making money for this big corporation and your school, and you don't get any of that in return. So I feel like a lot of times just going to this potential separate league, it doesn't help you that much when you're trying to develop yourself as a person. Because if that's all you know, and then if you come out of high school and you just go to this separate league where you don't know anyone, you don't have any real sense of home, you're just like traveling with a team, you don't have like your own free time, you're not learning anything and developing as a person. I feel like people would rather go to college, but the issue is that when they're at college, they can't get any monetary value.
Exactly. And when they're in another league per se, they do get paid. You mentioned only NBA and NFL. Is this not like an occurrence in other sports like baseball, hockey?
I know in baseball, players get drafted out of high school rather frequently, and since there are so many rounds in the Major League Baseball draft, it's definitely not really an issue because of how young you can draft a player and then develop him in the major leagues. Just because when you're in baseball and you get drafted, there's so many levels because there's single A, double A, triple A, major leagues. You can send a rookie that you just drafted out of high school is like 18, 19 years old to single A baseball and he'll just be fine there, especially if he doesn't really have any plans to go play baseball for this top college. But in the other leagues, like the NBA and the NFL, they don't really have that opportunity to come out of high school and play for a professional league.
Yeah, so based off what I'm hearing from you, you think if you can directly draft players out of high school in the NBA and NFL, that would be a good solution to this whole ordeal?
I feel like if the NFL I feel like the NBA has taken a good step with what they've done with the G League, where they'll offer these top prospects $125,000 a year for 1 year instead of just going to college to be a one and done. I think that's a good step in the right direction. And I feel like if the NFL could establish some kind of thing similar to the G League, where they could have maybe 20, 30 guys on a roster who could just, like, it's made up of young players who just are trying to make a spot for themselves on an NFL roster. And I feel like if you could do something instead of force them to go to this college for like 3 years when they have no intentions of actually doing anything at that college and they just want to get to the pros.
Mm-hmm. We're spending a lot of our time talking about the player and how the player is impacted. Is the school at all impacted as a result of this long ordeal about whether or not college athletes should be paid?
I feel like it is somewhat, because since there's such a want from these college athletes to get monetary value right away, I feel like there's a lot of times when colleges feel the pressure and they're willing to engage in scandals to potentially bring in top prospects by paying them illegally. And it's usually not even a lot of money. It's probably what they would be making if the NCAA would just pay their college players. But I feel like a lot of times schools are impacted just because they feel this pressure to then recruit top players so that they can make more money for their school. And they're willing to kind of engage in these shady acts in order to bring players on because they know that otherwise they wouldn't have to pay them.
Mm-hmm. What do you make of the fact that in the media, it's more so the top players in their sport, that they're the ones getting involved in these scandals?
I think it just says that schools are really invested in trying to bring these players on because they know the economic benefit it'll have for their school. And they know that if they just pay, say, this top college basketball prospect like $100,000 once, if that results in them playing in like 2 more March Madness games, that's like a few $1 million in revenue. And they're perfectly fine with doing that. So they have so much leverage that they can do this kind of stuff, and the players will consent because they're getting to play at this top school and they're getting paid. And even though it's illegal, they feel like it's fine because they just want to get paid for what they do.
Yeah. You mentioned that it's illegal. If a player is caught and it is disclosed that the player is paid, what disciplinary actions happen on the player? Is he punished in any way, shape, or form?
A lot of the times, usually the school or the player will get like wins or championships revoked, which I still feel isn't a great solution because it's still not doing anything to help the issue of why these players are being illegally paid anyway, which is because they can't be legally paid, which I think is just wrong.
Yeah. Who are some notable athletes in schools that have gotten caught up in these scandals?
The biggest one that I can remember from college football is Reggie Bush, where at USC, I believe in 2006, he received illegal payments for like a house and stuff. So what happened to him is I believe he got a Heisman Trophy revoked, which is the biggest individual award probably in all of college sports. And then there are so many college basketball scandals with the top prospects, with people such as DeAndre Ayton, where they've been presumably illegally paid to come play for certain college programs.
And what happens to the school when it's disclosed that they have been paying?
A lot of times, they'll probably get some kind of cheap fine and some wins revoked, but overall, it doesn't really hurt the schools that much. And I feel like since it's so difficult to get caught, and since the penalty seems to be so minor, I feel like that's why so many schools are willing to do this.
Do you think if the penalty was made more stringent, do you think more schools would not pay in their recruiting process of college athletes?
I feel like they still might do it a good amount, and I feel like a main reason that they have this power to do this is because of the fact that college athletes aren't paid. And they feel like, oh, if we can just get this advantage by paying them instead, then he'll come pay for us, and he'll come play for us. And that's why I think a lot of top college sports systems have been able to stay on top for so long, because they get revenue and they can use that to bring in more college athletes that they can either not pay or pay a small amount illegally.
Yeah, it's kind of sad based off what you're telling me. The corruption, not only in the schools, but how much impacts these players in their lives.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of times players, they could be dependent on this pay that the colleges are illegally giving them, because otherwise they might not be able to successfully live. And I feel like a lot of these college players believe that they should be paid, even if it's illegally, because they want the player services and they're willing to give it to them for money. And just with how much these college athletes work at their craft, it's basically like a job. Like, they'll train like almost as much as a normal person who has a job works in a week.
Yeah, you mentioned this notion of work. You feel as if college football and like college basketball, playing those sports is work just like any other job, and therefore they deserve to be paid?
I definitely do, because they are working and generating income for this billion-dollar business, and they're making a lot of money for this business, and they're getting practically none of it. And even if they're on scholarship, that's not that much compared to like how much they're generating for their business. In fact, college in the NCAA March Madness, the ad revenue generated from that was more than the NBA playoffs and finals. So the fact that we're seeing, like, for example, these NBA players are getting like incredible contracts with like 20, 30, even like $40 million per year, and college athletes are getting nothing, I think that's just ridiculous.
But don't you think it's incentive? You play hard in college, you develop your skills in college, then you get to the pros, and there you'll have access to the 20, 30, $40 million contracts.
But the thing is a lot of people who play college sports don't end up going pro, and they could be a starter, a very solid starter for a team that generates hundreds of millions of dollars, and they still don't go pro, and then they end up not even they don't gain anything from it. And I feel like you still have to pay them because of how much they've generated for your school.
Yes. However, if this is the case, if you just have like a mid-tier player who doesn't make it in the NBA, let's say you gave him a scholarship, don't you feel like you help the kid in a way more so probably than giving him money by giving him a free college education?
I feel like that's not a bad start. Is a scholarship for a free college education, but once he's there and he's spending all his time working to help the school, I feel like you have to reward him in some ways a bit more than the free education, because once he's there and he has that free education, what's he going to do now to survive? A lot of times they spend all their time working and getting money for the school, but then they don't have any money for themselves.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Will, for your time.
All right, no problem.
It was a very nice interview.